Hi class, let's start the chapter. This chapter we will be talking about monopoly. Um, we have a tendency of thinking that always monopoly is something is bad. Monopoly is happening when one company is supplying everything, like here in Ontario. You have Rogers is the monopolistic has a monopolistic market, or in post office used to have a monopolistic market. Um, we have a tendency to think that anytime there is a monopoly, uh, and this actually is not a game. One supplier to everything to the market in that field, it's something not good. And here in this chapter, we will be showing up in what cases monopoly is a good thing and in what cases monopoly is a bad thing and a perfect competition could be a good thing. So let's start the chapter explaining the differences in this case. So chapter 10 talks about monopoly. We did not do a chapter 9, we will leave it later on. In this chapter, explain how monopolies come into existence and why they must reduce their prices to sell more. We're also going to describe how the profit maximizing output and price are determined for a monopolist. Explain the 5 grounds on which a monopolist can be criticized. We will explain the significant differences between monopoly and perfect competition. We'll explain the 3 grounds on which the monopolist can be defended and discuss ways the government can change the behavior of monopolists. So, what's a monopolist? It is monopoly, a market in which one single firm, the monopolist, is the sole producers, like Rogers for the telecommunication services here. And it's protected from new competitors by the barriers to entry. So you wonder why, how come Rogers is the only monopolist? And what about the other operators like Bell and others? Well, these guys take the service from Rogers actually and resell it to us. So what's the barriers to entries? Barriers to entries is the obstacles, excuse me, that makes, sorry, sorry. Um, Barriers to entries is the obstacle that makes it difficult for a new participants to enter a market. Now, technical barriers such as a sole ownership of a resource, for example, oil wells, legal barriers such as a public franchise license, patent, and copyright, like Rogers, economics barriers caused by economics of scales, like Crown, the CN, Canadian National Railways. Now, just to see your understanding, the following industry is very difficult. What type of barriers to entry is involved? Like a computer operating system. It is a technical barriers, sole ownership of resources, any inventions, you might have it difficult to enter, to compete with it. Um, Zantac, for example, is a medicine that discovered for ulcer, and they spent around $11 billion over 10 years. And the government, FDA, stopped every other company to produce that. And the result is that when they're spending in a pharmaceutical companies that much amount of times and money, which is I think is a 10 years spent on research, $11 billion. They should see the returns for it so they can continue with that. So that's one of the good monopoly approach. Commercial aircraft manufacturing, this is what you call the economics of scale, economic barrier or economics of scale. And the West Coast wild salmon fishing, it is a legal barrier because it needs a license, so the government probably would not give you a license to operate. Now, monopoly is able to set whatever the price it wishes. That's the bad side of it. It can set either the price or quantity sold, but not both of them. So they can set up the price, and because you cannot find it in available by other suppliers, they can set up the price. Or they can set up the quantity, but they cannot set up the both together. Since the monopolist is the industry, it faces the market demand of the for the product. So it is monopolist is the supplier side, but one supplier basically. So there is not lots of suppliers. And for the demand is kind of a downward slope curve and must decrease the price in order to sell more. So the more expensive it is, the less people are willing to buy. So they can decrease the price to sell more, but they cannot set up both the quantity and the price because buyers can cut down in buying. So as example, the marginal revenue of a monopolist is an example here. Can you see that um, as they sell one quantity, they sell it if it's at $20, their total revenue is at $20, and their average revenue is at $20, and the marginal revenue is at $20 because they just sold one unit. And as number of units increases by decreasing the prices, you notice that the average revenue also decrease and the marginal revenue is also decreasing, but the total revenue is increasing. And they keep doing it until they reach where, for example, the marginal revenue becomes zero. And that's where they are maximizing their profit. It's just like a supply and demand. And as I said, in this case, the supply is presented by one, not by multiple firms. So to increase the sales, a monopolist must reduce the price, not just on the last unit sold, but on the whole of its output. So it's actually they do on the all output, they do reduce the price because the price has to be set, or they can do quantity increase or decrease. So as you see here, as the marginal revenue is always below the demand and average revenue, and loss of revenue, which is they can reduce their loss of revenue at $5 when they decide to reduce their quantity by 1%, 10%. So what they did here is actually they gain uh, of revenues, more revenues by reducing the quantity is supplied or reducing the prices. And the gain revenue is $15 million as what they do sell. This is the price here at 16. They sell 5 million, and at 10 they can sell 6. So you multiply 16 by 5 minus 15 and a half by 6, and yes, and then 1.1 by 50, and you're going to end up with a $15 million extra revenue. So how they do set up their prices, on how they select their prices. The total revenue, it increases as more units is sold. So the more you sell, the more revenue is increased, and keep increasing until it start declining here. The more than you sell, the less revenue is generating. And that we showed it earlier, that the total revenue is maximized when the marginal revenue is 0. So this is here where the marginal revenue is 0, and that's where they maximize their prices. And if you see it here, that's where their marginal revenue is equal with a 0. So they do maximize their profit, their revenue when it comes to marginal revenue is 0. And average revenue is identical to total demand curve. Because it's a one supplier, so your average revenue of the monopolist is a one supplier is equal with the demand curve. The more, how much they demand, the customers demand it, is one supplier that's selling it, so it's equal. When the marginal revenue is positive, as we said, the total revenue is raising. As it becomes the negative below 0, then the total revenue is falling. So at this point is actually the total revenue is maximized, but as it becomes a 0, it keeps falling. The total revenue is maximized when the marginal revenue is 0. Now, from the old, you remember that that the drop of the price increased the total revenue if demand elastic. So, if the demand is elastic, the increased total revenue, a drop in the price will increase the total revenue. Why? Because the customer, the demand shows a reaction to reduce prices. When the prices drops, a decrease total revenue, it is because the demand is inelastic. And we said that because this is the customer does not show any reflections. The demand doesn't show any reflection when it is inelastic. Whether you reduce the price or increase the price, they don't show the reflection. So if you drop in the price and the customer don't show any extra willing to buy things, so you are reducing your total revenue. But when you're dropping the price and the customer, that's showing some reaction and willing to buy more, that's when you increase your total revenue. But a monopolist can only increase the quantity sold by dropping the price. So the issues here is they cannot, look at the elastic and inelastic in that way. They can only increase the quantity sold by the dropping the price. So if they drop the price, they can sell more. Thus, it will only produce more as long as the demand is elastic, or less if it becomes inelastic. A monopoly situation, if the market is elastic, what they do, they will drop the prices to let the people buy more from them. So it will only produce more if their demand is elastic. By if they drop in the price, they find that. But they will produce less if it become inelastic. So they're not going to drop the prices if the customer does not show any reaction, which is in case of the elastic. And there is two ways of doing it. Is by reducing the price or reducing the quantity demanded. So in the case of the total profit of the monopolist, it is, if you see here, if they are selling one unit, the price at $20, their total revenue is $20, total cost is $40. They do a loss here. And as the quantity increases, since the price is, they trying to, drop the price, so the quantity, millions of demanded increases. And you see that the total revenue, it also increases as they decreasing the prices. And their total cost, because of the marginal cost, is declining. So it's a 54 to 56, and this total profit is total cost minus total revenue. And they keep producing more because they are one supplier and multiple demands, many demands. So they keep dropping the price to generate more revenue. And when they're generating more revenue, their total profit increases and keep increasing until they reach the break even, which is at production of seven, 8 units, which is at that time they decide, everybody will buy this product at $13. So this is where they break even, and if they go more, they will be in a loss. So to maximize the profit, usually we know the total revenue minus the total cost is the greatest when it is in this area. Actually, this is where they do maximize their profit. So, you know, it starts from zeros, the total revenue, and they're not selling, but, you know, the setup, the fixed cost is here, as we spoke last chapter. And as the production goes on, the marginal cost reduces, and the biggest is space area between them. It is where they're maximizing the profit at 6 unit. In the same time, this is where they are, the marginal revenue is equal, the marginal cost is equal with zeros. So the total profit curve, it's at its maximum when the slope of total revenue is of the total cost, or when the marginal cost and marginal revenue is equal, which is at this situation where the profit maximize output. So the break even, we know that the total cost equal with the total revenue, that when the break even happens. If you look at this, what do you see? You see that the total revenue is equal with the total cost. That's where they are maximizing their profit. After that, they will go into loss. So this is where the biggest space between the total revenue and total cost is. That's where here they maximize their profit in this case. Okay, so they select the point where total marginal revenue equal with the marginal cost. And if you look at the total profit here, you would select this one or this one. And the reason is because they're making a profit of 18 and they're making a profit of 18 here. But when they stop, if they stop when they start losing a profit, so at, you know, at marginal revenue equal the marginal cost as the graph is showing. So average and marginal cost and revenue from monopolies. Consider the average and marginal revenue. Now the break even, we said, when it's the average revenue and average cost, that's where it's a break even. When there is total cost, revenue minus total cost is equal with zero, or when the average revenue and average cost equal with zero, which is this point. Now, anywhere that average revenue is higher than average cost will be a profitable for them. So they produce at average revenue equal with the average cost, or anywhere the average revenue more than average cost. Profit are maximized when the marginal cost equal with a marginal revenue. So where is the marginal cost equal with the marginal revenue? We will notice that at this point, the marginal cost with their marginal revenue, so they're really not producing at this point. They suppose if it's a multiple suppliers, they will be producing at this point. But if it's a monopolies, they will be producing at this because the marginal cost equal with the marginal revenue. That's when total profit, they are generating an extra profit. So, and when it's the, we said when it's the average cost, okay, equal with the average revenue, then at this point, average cost and average revenue, or at the second point here, that's the break even. So as long as the average revenue, which is this one, higher than average cost, that's where they are making a profit. But where they don't select here or here, they select where is the average revenue equal with the marginal cost. So at the 6.6 quantity here, where they produce, what they're supplying is they are supplying 6 quantity, which is uh, that's where they're maximizing their profit. So the difference here, they do that, the marginal revenue equal with the marginal cost. That's where they're maximizing their profit. The situation, what they say about it is in monopolists able to make economics profit indefinitely. So for them is they make they can set up the price or the quantity we said, and they can set up the prices very high and make lots of percentage of profit. That's one of the criticism, and are both productive and allocated inefficiently because they are the only sellers in the market. They can select the price, and then when they select the price, there is no pressure for them to minimize their costs because nobody is competing with them, so they can be uh, productively and allocating inefficiently when they're producing. The other criticism says they can create a more unequal distribution of income and wealth with the societies. Because you notice that, for example, only Rogers has the right. So they went, the Rogers getting richer and richer, and the people are getting poorer, and people, and also the people who work for Roger, they get a better salaries than the rest of the other operating. So they are creating a more unequal distribution of income and wealth within the society. And they use their power to practice a price discrimination. So because there is no other seller, they can use, their power to increase the prices in some places where nobody can compete with them. So they do a price discrimination. These are the criticism about monopolists. So to look at it really in this sense is the fact that if two group of A and B, when monopolist comes in and try to look at them, what they do, if they see the fact that the customer inelastic, no reaction to increase the prices, what they do, they increase the price because they are the only sellers, and the is we know in a perfect competition, if the price goes more, the suppliers shift out and there's more suppliers comes in because there's more profit. Here, because no suppliers comes in and the customer has no option but to take the price, and it's the customer is inelastic, so they will increase the price. Now, in the second case, when they find the customer is elastic, they looking to maximize their total revenues also. So in both cases, they're looking for maximizing. But in the case of inelastic, what they do, they increase the prices because the customer has to buy that quantity. They don't show reaction. But when they find out they can show the reaction, what they do, they drop the prices because people will buy more. So this is the situation where uh, people criticizing the monopolist approach. And if it's number of customers, if it's inelastic, they say, well, let's increase the price because the customer will be buying the same thing. So we're maximizing the total revenue. But if they feel that the customer shows elastic or reaction, what they do, they decrease the price so they can sell more and they're maximizing their revenue. So here, if two group A and B have a different elastics of demand, a monopolistic can change the different price to each rather than offer the same price for the both. And in a point C is like here, it is not treating everybody the same. It differentiate based on the prices to maximize its revenue. So here when we're looking at the perfect competition versus monopoly, so there is benefit of having a monopoly. What's the benefit? Unlike the perfect competitive firms, monopolies charge, a higher prices. We know that produce a lower output because they know, some they want to increase to maximizing their profit. These outputs are below the economy capacity, and we saw in the graph they don't produce according where they price meet the demand and quantity. It is they produce where the below the quantity, and this will be probably may cause a profit in a short run and a long run the same. In the perfect competition, we said that if the profit in the short run is high, then more suppliers comes in the market, and then becomes more supply, and more supply will reduce the price, push the price down. But in this case, there is no more suppliers coming in the market. So the output, they can keep it below the market demand so they can have the price is high. In a perfect and competition monopoly, in a competitive prices, we know that supply, when the supply meets the demand, this is the price and cost for it. The quantity is 60 and the price is at 6. But we know that in the monopoly case, they don't produce according to demand and supply here. They produce according to where is the marginal revenues meet of marginal revenue and the marginal cost meet. So in a perfect, where is supply and demand meet, or as you see in the graph here, the marginal cost or the supply and the demand meet. That's in a perfect. In the imperfect or in the monopoly, they don't produce at this. We said earlier, they will be producing where the marginal revenue is equal with a 0. So what happened here, the quantity is, which is here, marginal revenue equal with a marginal cost. They produce at 40 a quantity per unit, not 60. And the prices is higher. So because the demand is higher than the supply, so really when they produce at 40, which is the intersection of suppliers and marginal revenue, they end up raising the price. So this is the price of monopoly. This is the price of competitive from here to here, but the price of monopoly is 8 equal at $8. They're selling less quantity at a higher prices. Now, there is an expression you probably need to know. It's something called consumer surplus and producer surplus. And monopoly result in a less consumer surplus, more producer surplus, and that has a dead weight loss. What's a consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is, you know, at this price, for example, say at the price of 10, if you look at this graph, at the price of 10, the consumers is willing to buy 20. And at the price of, for example, 40, the consumers is willing to buy 40. But actually, everybody in the market is selling at the price of 6, which is consumers buying 60. There's some consumers who is willing to pay if they raise the price here, but they're not raising the price, so they are keeping the price at this level. And these people who is willing to pay is paying at this level instead of as this level or this level or this level. So this part, they call it a consumer surplus. Here, what you call a producer surplus. In the producer surplus is basically, the suppliers is selling at 60 of them. But as the price drops, there is less suppliers are willing to supply. And this triangle is called a producer surplus. So this is called consumer surplus, and this is producer surplus. If we move this to the case of monopoly, what will happen here? We notice that the consumer is selling at $8 instead of $6. So what is creating? Creating a consumer surplus, which is now we know that there is certain consumers drop out and they're not willing to buy because it's moved from here to here. Okay. And the same thing is because, there is certain consumers, their supply is supposed to be at this and it's coming down. There is certain suppliers is dropping out because they cannot reach to this profit on the break even. So what has been created here is created a consumer surplus and producer surplus differently than this one, which is the equal thing, because we know this is equilibrium. Here it's not at the equilibrium. So when suppliers sell at this price and the quantity is less, we have what you call a dead weight, which is the difference between consumer surplus and producer surplus. It stands for the amount of the people who want to buy, but they cannot buy. So they drop in out, and that's what you call the dead weight loss. These are criticisms so far about monopoly, because the dead weight loss is when some people wants to buy but they cannot buy. So that's the part of the people demand that has dead weight loss. And the other side, people who are defending the monopoly, they said they capture a large economics of scales of production. They because they have a large economic of scales and they produce a lot, the average revenue, the average cost is reducing. They engage in the extensive research and development into new technical or production of new product. And just like we brought this Zantec situation for ulcer, and they do spend lots. They spend over 11 years spending 10 billion to just come up with the Zantec. Imagine if they not having the right to distribute that, they might not be doing it again. And they attract a high quality staff by offering relative high wage and good working condition because they are not looking to minimize or their costs by having a lower wages. So they attract a high quality of the staff. Now the situation is just like what's happening with COVID-19 and um, shots that people are getting is the same situation. There is a lots of investment happen. So these companies need to generate a profit from this investment. And that's the reason that you see there is a few companies who's doing, and the other companies for any technical reason, for any political reason, they are screening them out because these pharmaceutical companies, if they don't make a profit, they would not in the next event will not be willing to put their effort to discover some medicine for curing people. Now, what we have, and we have something called the national monopoly, which is a single producer who is able to produce at a lower cost than competition firm. It's just like the oil. Saudi Arabia has a natural monopoly, can produce at $5 a barrel, where Canada can produce at $35 a barrel of oil. So a single producer who is able to produce at a lower firm, at a lower cost than the competing firm could, the cost, it's less. And we see that in probably railroad in Canada. One can produce a huge amount of services and see it, I'd say, at $1.50 per unit. Yet if you're running three or four uh, operations, they cannot produce a whole sum which they can, and they cannot reduce their average cost. But because there is a big demand for one producer, the more they produce more, and the more the production, the lower the average cost to a certain point. So that's where they see that the natural monopoly, or it's a single producer was able to produce at the lower cost than competing firms. So any firm that can produce at a lower cost, technically they would be in a monopolistic situation because the others cannot compete and they can reduce the price to a level where the others cannot compete. So they have to get out and they stay as single. In the case of public utilities, goods or services regarded as essential and therefore usually provided by the government, competition may well be costly and wasteful. And we kept repeating the situation for post office, landline telephones, things that they don't generate a big profit. You cannot give it to the business, private sectors, because what they're going to do, their intention to maximize their profit. So when you give things that they don't generate profit, what they will do, they cut down into the cost to generate the profit. When they cut down into the cost, that means they cut down into the qualities. So, for example, the bus transportation in Manitoba runs by the government because it does not make a profit or very minimum profit. And if they give it to the private companies, what they will do, they will stop some buses from going through certain route, and then you will see the services going down. So that's the reason you see buses running by a crown corporation. Other countries, third world countries, they make this mistake. They keep the non-profitable uh, operation to private, hoping that they can get rid of the excess of costs. And actually, what will happen, these private companies, they do one of the things, take the money and run away, or minimize the quality of the product and their cost to maximize their profit. This is a natural, and we'll end up with a bad services or bad roads. But how the government can control the monopoly? There are options to change the monopoly behavior. One of the things, you can tax these monopolists by taxing them. The other thing, so you can lower their profit. The more they seeking to make more profit, you have to put certain level and tax them and takes part of their profit. Now the government can put a price ceiling, a price setting, till the monopolists cannot increase more than that. On can nationalizing, so they can take over and make it a government or nationalizing, like we saw in the oil industry, we saw in the banana industry. South American nationalized the bananas, Middle East nationalized the oil. There are some countries still not nationalized and run by a monopolist or oligopolist. So when you taxing, what happen is lump sum profit tax affect the fixed cost, but not the variable cost. So it's going to be basically you take part as is when you tax a company, what happened? You putting more taxes on the fixed cost and not the variable cost. Increase average cost, but the marginal cost stays ineffective because you're taxing the monopolist, you're not taxing on their production. And the output and the price leave unaffected. So because they can control one of the things, whether output and the price. So if you taxing them, their fixed costs increase and they cannot, they have to, the output and the price level stays ineffective. And the profit due to higher costs, because you're taxing them, it gets lower. When the government set up the prices and telling the monopolist that's the level of the price, we have what you call a socially optimum price. The price that produces the best allocation of the products from the society point of view, that is price equal with the marginal cost. So when you're putting a price from the society point of view, how much you're producing for extra unit, you should be pricing it at that level, which is called the price equal with the marginal cost. That's the socially optimum price. The fair return price, when the price is guaranteed that the firm will earn more profit, that's when the price equal with average cost. So the marginal cost says, you know, as you increase one more marginal, how much it costs you, I'll pay for it. The average cost says, well, how much you're producing, divide it and get the average cost and put the price. So some units below the average cost, and because the price is stable, you're making more profit. As the reach to the average cost, your profit will be getting lower, and that's what you call a fair return on price, which is the price equal with the average cost. And the social optimum price is the price equal with the marginal cost. So we learn about the barrier to entry encourage the monopolists. We learn what kind of they are, how monopolists maximize their profit. We heard a few criticism and the defense of monopolists, and what's the difference between the monopolist and perfect competition, and how the government can control by taxing the monopolist or setting up the price. So that's the end.